The Self-Publishing Advice Conference, SelfPubCon 2025, brings indie authors from around the world together for 2 days of insight, inspiration, and connection. It's live online October 18 and 19 and free to attend. Get early access to our international competition and all the latest conference updates at selfpublishingadvice.org/conference-2025. Welcome to Self-Publishing with ALLi from the Alliance of Independent Authors. This week, it's our advice stream focusing on editing and design. Discover how you can apply best practices in these first stages of the publishing process to ensure the excellence of your work and its ability to appeal to your target readership. And here's your host for the Self-Publishing with ALLi podcast, ALLi Campaigns Manager, Matty Dalrymple.
Hello, everyone. I am Matty Dalrymple. I'm the Campaigns Manager for ALLi, and I am here today with Karen Williams. Hey, Karen, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Matty. It's a delight to be here today.
I am pleased to have you here. And just to give our listeners a little bit of background on you, Karen Williams is the book mentor at Librotas. She helps business owners, experts, and thought leaders write authority-building books that elevate their credibility and grow both their business and brand. Karen is the author of 10 books, including Your Book is the Hook and Book Marketing Made Simple. She is also a TEDx speaker and the host of the Business Book Bites podcast. And we're going to be talking today about how nonfiction business authors can shape a book that builds their business. And so I always just like to ask my guests, how is this something you got into? What was your background that led you to really want to focus on this topic?
Total accident, Matty, total accident. I wrote my first book in 2009 when I was 3 years into running my business. And at the time, I was doing business coaching with new coaches. And I had the opportunity to interview successful coaches to find out their secrets. And I made the declaration in August 2009 to write a book about it, not having a clue what to do, where to start. Wrote the first book, published it, became an Amazon bestseller. It was relatively successful, bearing in mind not many people were doing it back then. I said never again, but 2012, I found myself writing my second, my third. And many of my clients started saying to me, Karen, you've written a couple of books. How did you do it? And I realized that I'm really good at seeing structure when other people see chaos. I'm really good at seeing the message where other people get lost in it because they're so close to it. And so 2014, that's how I kind of accidentally moved into that area. So I dipped my toe in the water. I started saying that I'd like to help people with the book. August 2014, I started putting my own process together so people could follow it. Of course, that's evolved hugely in the last 11 years, but it was a really good starting point to actually realize what I did and how I did it. And the fact there is a process to follow when you're writing a nonfiction book. And many people don't know that. They just jump in, open up a Word document, write chapter 1 and then get started, where there's so much prep that needs to be done first, as you probably know, in terms of all of your writing. The preparation, the research, the being really clear on that message is something a lot of people don't get clear enough on, I don't think, before they start writing. So that's really my journey, how I moved into it. And yes, as you said in the introduction, 10 books now, including planners, journals, audiobooks, digital books. And I've got another one that's coming to the forefront at the moment. It won't leave me alone.
So you had said that your process looks quite different in the time you've been writing. Can you think of one thing that was an especial surprise to you or that has evolved the most from the time you wrote your first book?
I think the thing that has evolved really is changes in the industry, changes in technology, certainly changes with AI, changes with the tech that we use for marketing and things like that. The fact that these days more and more people are writing books, so we have to stand out. We can't just put anything out there. We have to find that unique point of difference, with that unique angle that stands us out from anything else that's out there. So I think it was easier back in 2009 when I wrote the first one because less people were doing it. But now, certainly since the pandemic, it's become much more obvious that more people are writing books, fiction and nonfiction, I think.
Yeah. I can imagine there are two ways that people get to a nonfiction book, people in the business world. One would be they're running a business and they decide to write a book about it. And then I think that there are people who are writing a book and realize that they can create a business out of it. Is there one of those that you focus on more? Do you accommodate both of those in your advice and your consulting?
I accommodate both of those, but most people come to me because they've got a business that they want to write about. So it might be their personal story if they're building their brand, or it might be a system or a process that they teach and they want to reach more people with it and stand out as a credible expert. But some people do come to me with that kind of, I've got something here I want to create, but it always comes from a lived experience or a knowledge or wisdom or something. So most people fall in the first camp, but a few people fall in the second camp as well. For me, the most successful business authors are those that grow their business off the back of their book. They already have something that's there that people want, that they know is important, that people are buying into. And then they create something off that to create that credibility, that expertise.
I can imagine that a lot of our listeners as writers may also fall into a category where they're writing some nonfiction, like they're writing a blog. I think this is a perfect example. They've been writing a blog about some topic that interests them. Maybe they're writing about the process of writing, whatever that might be. And now they've accumulated dozens or hundreds of blog posts, and they're starting to think, oh, this could be a book. Do you encounter that too? And that's a whole other format that you have to massage if you want to get it into book form.
Yeah, funnily enough, I had a conversation with someone yesterday about exactly that. Someone who has got lots and lots of great content on Facebook and through her blog. And she's now looking at how she can formulate that into a book. So absolutely. I think these days we are in, I don't want to be, say a cliche, but we are in the age of information, aren't we? There's so much information out there. And as creators, so it's certainly myself and probably yourself as well, we create information. So we do have so much at our fingertips. Actually, when you're writing a nonfiction business book, you don't need to start from scratch. You need to start by looking at what you already have, what you've already created, and actually how do you turn that into a book? And I think that makes it slightly easier, but slightly more difficult at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine a challenge people would have is that they have sort of a mishmash of content. Maybe they have a blog and maybe they've written a couple of articles for journals and maybe they've given some presentations, and now they have accumulated this the raw material on a particular topic, and they have to decide what to do with it. And I know one of your focuses is on how do you shape the content with the end in mind. So if somebody comes to you and just says, I have a bunch of stuff on this topic, what should I do with it? How would you talk them through an understanding of what they really want to achieve from that?
That's an interesting question, because I think first off, I would ask people what they want the book to do for their business. So what is their vision? What do they want to do more of? What do they want to do less of? So they can see how it fits into their ecosystem, either what they've got already or what they want to create. Then I would suggest they really get clear on the message behind the book. Who is the ideal reader? What problem are they potentially solving with it? Which is relevant to some books, but not other books. And what is the ultimate outcome they want the reader to get from it? So in terms of a blog style book, that lends itself very nicely to maybe an A to Z or a dip in and dip outable book. So it may not teach a system, whereas somebody who's already got a process might be writing more of a system-led book. So I think it really depends on the person. But first of all, it's getting really clear on that message before you actually do something with the blogs. Another thing that one might do is, you might think about how to theme the blogs as well. So if you're already working with clients like this lady you probably got an ideal client in mind, an ideal reader in mind. So you can look at the material probably will help that person because obviously it's getting some results for them. But it's just what sort of themes are we actually looking at? How would you pull it all together into something that makes sense and provides a journey for the reader, so an arc for them to follow?
Do you recommend a different approach in the creation of the book, depending on whether the person is looking to make money from the book, if that's their primary goal, versus if they want the book as a calling card for other opportunities? Or is that different, something that only comes about once the book's out and they're deciding how to market it, how to share it out?
Certainly most of my clients are using it as a calling card. Yes, of course, they want to make money from it, but the money comes off the back of the book. It doesn't come from, thousands of copies sold. Some of my clients go down the indie publishing route, of course. So there's a cost involved in terms of pulling the book together, editing, publishing, distribution of the book, et cetera, et cetera. So there's obviously a cost involved. If someone engages my services, there's a cost involved. So that does need to be taken into account. So that's why I think most of my clients tend to get their result by this paid speaking gigs or the courses or the programs or the workshops or the consultancy or the training that comes off the back of the book. of course, we want to reach as many people as possible. And there are tricks to do that as well. So they do go hand in hand. But I think for most of my authors, at least, the success comes off what comes off the back of the book in terms of the results that it actually, the doors it opens and that type of thing.
If someone is writing a book, they're interested in expanding their presence in expertise in indie publishing, let's just say, as our example. And this is a very detailed logistical question, but let's say they have the calling card book. They don't intend to write more books. This is going to be their one book. And as their career progresses, they learn different things. And now maybe something that they recommended initially in the book isn't quite as applicable anymore. Do you recommend that the book be more sort of evergreen in the sense that they could be making tweaks along the way without having to deal with like new ISBNs or relaunching it or putting out new editions? Or do you feel like once the book is out there and has performed its duty of illustrating that the person is an expert in that topic, that that's sufficient and they should just leave it alone?
That's a big question, Matty, isn't it?
It is.
It depends. It depends. Being somebody who's done a second edition of a book, Book Marketing Made Simple, which I published in 2017, I republished it as a second edition in 2023. And I thought it was going to be a few tweaks and it landed up being a massive rewrite. And it's hard to do a rewrite, let's be honest, because everything changes. It was a complete new edit, complete new rewrite. Everything just pretty much got thrown out the window and put back together again. It's easier to write a second book, to be fair. But I think that's the bind a lot of authors find themselves in as much as, how do you make something evergreen? Yes, if you're talking about ChatGPT, for example, we know that it can probably change tomorrow, next week, the month after. So we know that it changes all the time. So certainly you want to make it as evergreen as possible, not getting to specifics. Even when I launched the second edition of Book Marketing Made Simple, Twitter was changing to X and it hadn't really been accepted. So I kind of had to suddenly, put in X in brackets when I was talking about Twitter. So things are always going to change. It's so hard to keep something evergreen because something is like Twitter, you didn't think was going to be changed. No one was going to change their name, and it did. So many of the other tools I mentioned in the first edition, they changed. So it's hard not to be specific sometimes, otherwise it won't make sense to the reader. I couldn't really mention Twitter without saying the name Twitter. And obviously then it changed and evolved. So it's really hard to make something evergreen. Obviously there's dangers of doing a second edition, i.e. you've got to, as you just mentioned, you have to get a new ISBN. You lose the reviews from the first edition as well, usually through Amazon anyway. So there are definitely pros and cons. And of course, one could write another book that could be a stat that maybe shows how that author's expertise has evolved. Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but it's a hard one to answer.
Yeah, my goal is always to make my nonfiction books as evergreen as possible. But one of the things I've done is that things that I think are going to change frequently, I put on my website freely available to everyone and just say, if I'm giving advice on like tech to use in a certain circumstance, say, I don't want to commit this to the book, but if you my website, you can find that information. But obviously that's fine if it's just a bit of information here and there, but it doesn't work if it's, all throughout the book. And I think that what you're saying about the evergreen nature of it also brings up another topic we wanted to talk about, which is the format and choosing between things like how-to or memoir. So if you're writing a nonfiction book that's more memoir, I think people just understand that's a moment in time. They don't expect people to go back and necessarily update the memoir, whereas they would expect that with a how-to. So can you talk a little bit more about how authors would choose the right format, not only just for its evergreen nature, but for other considerations as well?
There seems to be, in my view, 5 different formats that you could write in. You've kind of got the story-led memoir-style book, which kind of leads from the narrative. So it might be a period of time, it might be somebody's whole life, it might be more, it's normally biographical, but you might intersperse sort of lessons and things like that. You've also then got the system-led books, which are more how-to in terms of following a system or process that you've curated. You've also got the resource-led books, which I mentioned earlier. So it might be a collection of resources around a particular topic that people can dip in and dip out of. The other type of book is more of the permission, more of a why-to book, in terms of if you have got a bold statement to make in the world, but maybe it doesn't follow a process. That's one approach that you could take. And the 5th one is around a collection of different things as well. So, for example, if you wanted to, with my first book, I did a lot of interviews around my topic to find out other people's secrets. And actually that became more of a collection of stories, even though there was a framework in the book. So I think it's knowing which approach you're going to take right from the very beginning is important.
I can imagine that those different kinds of formats that you were describing are sort of the equivalent of what would be genres. We think of as genres on the fiction side.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if people have in mind more than one book. Do you see pros and cons for them to either stick with one of those, like once you've trained your readers to expect a how-to type book, stick with how-to? Or is there ever a benefit to sort of moving among those different types to provide different perspectives on whatever your main overarching topic is?
I would say move between the types. I've written probably most of those. I've done my own memoir, which was out in 2017. And yes, obviously there's many, many years have passed since then. So things have changed, things have evolved for me. And obviously there's pros and cons of writing a memoir style book as well. So I've pretty much written probably all of those different types. And I think people get to know you on a different level. They get to know something different from you when you approach it in a different way. And I do find some of my clients come to me and they say, I'm not sure if I'm writing a memoir. I don't know if I'm writing a how-to book. And they might start with the how-to and then move on to the memoir next time, or vice versa, depending on their goals and their vision. So I think it's absolutely fine to switch because, as you said, they get to know a different part of you.
And if someone comes to you with that question about, I don't know whether the memoir or the how-to is going to serve my needs best, are there kind of checklist items they can go through and say, like, if what you want to achieve is such and such, then take it down this path. If you want to achieve this, then take it down this other path?
So I had a lady come to work with me earlier this year who had a mishmash in her book. So she started writing it. She got feedback from her business coach to have a conversation with me. And she had story, she had a bit of how-to, she had a bit of kind of more of a manifesto in that. And I looked at what her vision was, and her vision was to build her brand beyond her current business. So we looked at writing the memoir style book first, and there might be a how-to later. So I think it really does depend on that vision. If you want to speak about your journey because you've overcome something really terrible or something that you feel that people are going to get benefit from, a memoir style book will probably work. But if it's more about you want people to sign up for your course or your program, or you've got a process that, again, is going to change people's lives or make things easier for them, you might approach it from that how-to approach, that kind of process, system-led approach. So I think it really does depend on the vision and which one comes first. And sometimes one is a passion project and one isn't. So it really depends. Sometimes as a new author, you also have to learn how to write. You have to learn what works for you. So you might start with the one that you know you should do and then move on to the passion project later. That happens as well.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to speak with a number of memoir writers, and it seems as if a common theme is that they have to write the memoir for their own purposes, their own learning purposes or their own healing purposes or whatever that might be. And then when they get done, I think that if they're smart authors, then they realize that now they have to do a different path. Yeah. Now they've done the version that's for them, and now they have to do a path that is for the reader. And, depending, I can imagine that could be it's almost like you're saying about updating an edition of a book is almost harder than writing a new one, that doing that path that says, now I'm wearing the reader hat. That's got to be very difficult.
It is very difficult because I think when you are writing something that you've experienced, especially if it's a difficult situation, you have to write from a healed scar rather than an open wound. I can't remember who said that initially, but you don't want to write from that drama, from that woe is me. You kind of really want the reader to get something from it. So being able to put that reader hat on is so important because it's always thinking about the end result. So yeah, it might be about being cathartic, but actually that you want that reader to be able to go, oh, I get that she or he knows what I'm going through, but hey, this is what I can do about it. Because it's so easy to be in drama when we are in difficult situations, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how do we actually come to grips with what we've been through to make it a really compelling read, an interesting read for the reader so they actually get something from it and they can do something with your learnings. But it's hard because you've got to write a draft first and then you have to be brutal and edit it. When I wrote my own memoir, I had support from an editor who I know, who's a good friend of mine, who had to be brutal with me as well because I had to put that reader first rather than me first.
Yeah, that's a good friend who can wear both those hats.
I know.
Continue being your friend.
It wasn't always easy.
No, I can imagine not. Well, I know one of the other things you do emphasize is structure and that idea of how to keep the reader engaged. And we're talking a little bit about how that plays out or does not play out in a memoir style. Are there other tips that you had, just general tips for nonfiction writers about how you do that? How do you keep them turning the page in a nonfiction scenario?
Well, you've got to hook them in right from the very start. I think hooking them in with the back cover and the introduction and every single chapter, I think is important. It's about being interesting and to the point. It's about flow of information from one chapter to the other so that, there is a natural progression from one piece of information to the other. So whether it's a memoir style book or a kind of more of a how-to or even a collection of stories, it's about engaging people with the language. So that would be my tip, really.
One of the things I've done in my own nonfiction books is that way back in the day, back when I worked in the corporate world, I facilitated what I'll call like employee orientation around the company's values. And it was 2 days where we would talk about, we didn't like march through the values, but we said, here's a set of tools for how you operate in an effective way within our culture that you can apply. And one of the sort of underlying philosophies there was that as we said, knowledge without action makes you wiser, but no more effective. And so it was the actual taking of the action. And so for all my nonfiction books, I've always had a separate free downloadable document that would be at the end of each chapter. Here are the questions I'm asking. Here are the questions you should consider for yourself, and you can capture them in this. Are there other ways you have to make the reader feel invested in what you're trying to convey to them so that they'll actually act on it?
I think coaching questions, exercises, as you've just mentioned, Matty, are invaluable, aren't they? In terms of, I think as a reader, I think you get two types of readers. You get some who like to scribble all over it and answer all the questions. And then you get some who go, I'll go back to it later and never do. But I think, engaging with stories are great as well. Even in a how-to book, stories, client stories, your own story. It's about, ultimately, we want the reader to take action, don't we? They're reading the book for a particular reason. They've got a problem they want solving. They want to find out new information about something. So how do we galvanize them to do something with it? So as you've said, exercises, worksheets, downloads. 3 of my books are actually planners and journals. So that's another thing that you can do, is have a separate workbook or separate journal that people can write in if they don't want to write in yours. So that's another product, obviously, you can create. Although it's another thing to create, but that can also help people to take action. So the two go hand in hand, or have a workbook as part of a book as well. I've seen people do that. But you're right, it is about taking action. It's not about being passive and reading something. You want people to do something with what they've learned. And that's the whole point of a kind of more of a how-to or self-help book, isn't it?
Yeah. We had talked a little bit about making sure that your book is aligned with what your goals are, what you want it to be for your reader. There's also this aspect of making sure it's aligned with your brand. Is that a separate consideration than these things we've already talked about?
I think many of my authors are kind of, their business and their brand are very much interlinked, because they are the brand ultimately, because most of my clients are coaches, consultants, therapists, trainers. So they are the face behind their business anyway. So it is really about how they bring the two things together. So it does need to speak the same language as you would hear them if you saw them on a video or you saw them on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. That voice needs to match, that energy needs to match. That style needs to match. And you can tell if there's a mismatch as well. So
it would be interesting if somebody had built up a following by telling stories on YouTube or a podcast or something like that, and then they put out a book and there were no stories, then that would be, I think, an example of a mismatch.
Absolutely. Yeah. The ultimate compliment is when people says, I can hear, if they say to me, I could hear your voice as I read your book, not an audio book, but as they can hear my voice in their head as they're reading it. For me, that's the ultimate compliment, because it shows that my voice is coming through in my writing.
Yes, exactly. I wanted to jump off on something that we had talked about earlier with regard to, for example, having a workbook, to lead into one of my favorite topics to talk about, which is repurposing. And the thing that I thought about when we were talking about the workbook is a way that I found it very useful is that form that an anonymous reader anywhere could fill out, or even not a reader, even someone who is just interested in the topic of the book but hadn't purchased the book could fill out and get value from, has been input to consulting engagements. And so when I got to the point where I was offering consulting on a topic of my book, And I thought, oh, well, I need some kind of like questionnaire so I can prepare for my consulting engagement. And I thought, I don't need to do that because I've already done that. I've already given them the form that contains the information that I would want. So that would just be one example of repurposing. Talk a little bit about repurposing. I think that once people have put their heart and soul into this work, then it's so important for them to get, for them and their readers to get as much value as possible from it.
Well, this is a perfect example of repurposing, isn't it, Matty? In terms of this is what I talk about every day through my newsletter, through my books. So being on podcasts is a great way of repurposing blogs. And blogs go two ways, and any content goes two ways. Anything you've created in the past, as we've talked about, could go into the book. And anything you create in the book could go out onto social media or could be repurposed. I'm running a summer program at the moment, and I'm finding people are saying, have you got that as a resource? So I'm creating resources off the back of it by going, actually, no, I don't, but I could create that. So I think it becomes, I'm a creator and I find it really easy to create stuff, probably too much, to be honest. But it's really finding what is going to be of use to people. And if it's of use to the people on the program, and it could be of use to other people, absolutely, I'll share it. So questionnaires, worksheets, tips. There's so much that we can create. Webinars. Where do you start and where do you finish with that? We can create those resources. And I think if we can make a bigger difference to one person, it would probably make a bigger difference to 20 people. So I think it's coming back to the ideal reader, the ideal client. What do they want to know? What questions do they have? What resources can you provide them? It's going to help them and help you. One of the resources I have on my website is a Get Started workbook that my colleague and I put together probably about, it may even be 6, 7, 8 years ago. But people come back to it time and time again. And I love it when people complete it before they come and have a conversation with me, because they're ready to have that conversation. They're ready because they know the answers. And that for me is useful, and for them is useful as well. So things like that can be incredibly valuable and give you more assets that you can share with people. So when you can take something and when someone has a question, just say, have a look, listen to that podcast or have a look at that document. It makes it easy for you and it makes it easy for them.
That idea of building the community, I think, is great. I believe it's something that's easier to do on the nonfiction side than the fiction side. Certainly has been for me. Just because I think that, if one is writing cozy mysteries, then there are all sorts of different kinds of people who might like cozy mysteries. But if you're writing a how-to book about podcasting, then there's a very specific group of people who want that book. It's the people who are interested in podcasting. And so somehow I think it's easier to cater to their needs, to find them and, online forums and things like that. And it's also great because it can be a great two-way street. You're letting a group of people who are intrinsically interested in your topic know about it, but you also have this pool of people that can provide you with input about maybe these auxiliary sources to offer, or different formats, or the idea of another book. Do you have suggestions of best practices for how nonfiction authors can go about creating those kind of communities?
I think in the past it used to be Facebook groups, but they've kind of fallen out of fashion. I still have some myself because of the algorithms within Facebook, and you've obviously got LinkedIn communities as well.
Yeah, it does seem as if LinkedIn is evolving into less of a, I wonder where I can apply for a job, and
it
more
is,
like an actual social interaction. And I think it's especially good for nonfiction authors. I've had good luck there with my nonfiction books.
I run an online networking. So the first Tuesday of every month, I invite a group of authors onto Zoom and having a conversation for an hour. That's a great way of building a community. So, and also now we're back to normality after the craziness of the last 5 years, maybe having in-person events as well. So I think it really depends on the person, but I love communities. And community could also be market research for the book as well. Maybe getting a group of people in the room and actually asking them to feed into the book in terms of the content. There's so many different ways, but they would be the top ones in my view. And community has become, I think, after, especially, during the pandemic, the first part of it when so many people felt isolated. I think these days we want to be part of that community. And I've been running a summer program, but seeing people gel even after a few days because they feel like they're not alone anymore. For me, that's amazing to actually have that, the ability to be able to bring people together who are doing something similar. So it kind of normalizes the process and normalizes the highs and lows of going through the journey of writing a book.
Yeah. And then you're creating this group of, a street team, as people call it, people who are going to be championing your book and talking about it with other people who have that same kind of interest and pointing them to you, which is always good.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, Karen, thank you so much for talking through some of these best practices of how authors can use nonfiction to support not only their writing career, but their other businesses. So please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
Yeah, so the best place to go is my website, which is librotas.com, Librotas, which is a mishmash of libertas and libro is the book, obviously, and also freedom is the mishmash of those together. So Librotas is the website to go to.com. I also run my Copy and Connect Cafe first Tuesday of the month, which is my online networking, 12 o'clock UK time, which I know may be a bit too early for you in the US, but I have got one of my clients who gets up at the crack of dawn to join us. So it's a great opportunity to connect with other authors who are on a similar journey. So if you search for Karen Williams, the book mentor, you'll find me. I hang out a lot on LinkedIn because I find it's a really great place to get to know other people in who are kind of have got similar vibe and similar energy to me. So I find that's probably my home and sort of Facebook, but probably LinkedIn more than anything else.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the editing and design stream of the Self-Publishing with ALLi podcast, and if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.